So I'm going to get started right now. There are a few people I think who are not here yet, but nonetheless, we'll start on time today. So a few housekeeping things I'll share with you before I start the presentation today. So first of all, if your camera and your mics are off, I think everything will stream a lot better. If you do have a question though, feel free to save it to the end or during the presentation, just put it in the chat, which is over on the right-hand side of your screen, which I see some of you have found. So thank you for saying hello this morning. If you want to access some of the language and accessibility features, they're found in the top right corner of your portal. If you look in your top right corner, you'll see an A, and if you hover your cursor over that, you'll see you get language options, and right next to it is accessibility options. The presentation today is roughly 30 to 45 minutes. I'll leave some time for questions. Hopefully somebody will remind me in case I forget to check the chat box afterwards if any of you put your questions in there. I highly recommend that after the session is over, you take the time to read over the forms a little bit more thoroughly. I do not intend to read all of them to you today because forms can be, let's face it, they can be a little dry on the best of days to begin with. So I don't want to read them all to you today. So take the time on your own to go over them again in a little bit more detail after today. And all of you have a Youth Pathways consultant in your RCE or the CSFA. I highly recommend you reach out to them if you have any lingering questions after today about forms. There will be a follow-up session offered to all of you in August. Your YPCs will have office hours, and you can pop in and touch base with them and ask some questions, further questions about forms if you like. You'll get a follow-up email after today. So this is being recorded. I am also sharing the PowerPoint as well as any of my notes, and I think you'll have access to that after the session. There is a feedback form that I believe is being emailed to you as well, and we strongly encourage you to take the time and fill that out and send it back in if you could. That would be greatly appreciated. So, a brief introduction as to who I am. There's only one familiar name to me in this session. That's Kaylin from Yarmouth. It's nice to see you here, Kaylin, and all the others as well. I am, as you know already, my name is Jill Flynn-Camo. I'm the Youth Pathways Consultant for the Tri-County Regional Center for Education. So what I do in my role is provide support to the programs that are very career focused. So obviously cooperative education, options and opportunities, discovering opportunities, and skilled trades. I've been a teacher now. I'm going into my 30th year. And like some of you can probably relate, I've taught a lot of things in my teaching career. I taught history, French, I provided resource, taught family studies. The last 4 years in the classroom, I was a cooperative education teacher at Yarmouth High School, and I loved it. Very passionate about it. It was very, very rewarding. I think for some of you who are new to co-op, one of the things that you'll probably enjoy the most about it is watching the students come back to your class and sharing what they are learning on their work sites. It is extremely rewarding as a teacher to see the students come back with such a sense of pride and increased confidence and self-esteem because of what they are doing on their work sites. Probably one of the most daunting aspects of co-op is all of the paperwork. If you've taken the time to take a peek at the forms already, you'll discover, if you haven't already, that there is a lot of paperwork in co-op. It's probably the least favorable aspect of the job, but it is essential. It is essential that it is completed for a variety of reasons. Number one, the safety of the students. So what I'm going to share with you today, I'm going to give you an overview of some of the forms. And again, I'm not going to read them all in their entirety because I think forms can be dry as it is, and I don't want to put you to sleep. But I'll go through some of them with you, highlight some key things that and additional things that I'll add about them. And I'll also hopefully give you some tips on making it a little bit easier getting all that paperwork done. So before I begin and I start sharing my screen, I have a PowerPoint to share with you. I have a video I'll share with you. I just want to show you a few things that I brought home with me from the office. And I know you probably can't see these very clearly. They are in my PowerPoint, but they're so small. and I will mention them again later on, but I just wanted to show you some of the things that I have that I personally found as a co-op teacher were very helpful to have in terms of saving time. So one of the things, and I don't know how well you can see it, you guys out there can let me know if you can see this or not, but this is a pocket folder that I had made for all of the co-op teachers in the Tri-County Regional Center for Education. And it was not my original idea. Somebody before me actually had these printed. So there is so much paperwork to get done in co-op. At the start of the semester, it's a good idea to get organized right away. And I had these pocket folders done up, and all it is on the front is a checklist of all the forms that have to be filed for the student. On the inside, there is a checklist for graduation requirements, because O2 teachers who teach cooperative education also watch over students and make sure that they have all of the required courses for their O2 certificate, as well as graduation requirements. When I get these reprinted, I will do something differently the next time. This checklist on the front is just for 1 co-op credit, but students in O2 have to do 3 co-op credits. So next time I get these printed, I'm going to have a checklist on the front, and on the inside, I'll have 2 more printed directly in the file folder. So again, it's just a tool to help with all the filing that is required. Your YPC in the CSFA or in the Regional Center for Education that you are a part of will ask to see your file folders at some time. And it's not because they're looking over your shoulder per se. It's part of their responsibilities to check to make sure everything is being filed as it's supposed to be and completed correctly. So it's nice to have some kind of a filing system that you can pull out and easily share the files as well. So there's that little tip. The other thing that I get printed off is the required forms that people need to have a copy of. So this is one of them. This is the commitment agreement. I don't know if you can see me holding this. But what I have done, some of the forms you'll notice at the bottom, they'll tell you right on the bottom of the form who needs to get a copy of them. And there are a lot of forms that you need to provide to people. So you need to keep one on file. You need to make sure a parent or guardian has one, and you need to make sure the host has one of several forms. And which ones, again, it's indicated on the bottom of the form. But to save you time at the photocopier, I have these printed off in our regional center. I'm not sure if they do it where you're at, but these forms are in triplicate. You can see there's 3 layers to this, just so that when these are completely filled out, it's just so much easier to just tear them apart and make sure everybody gets a copy. So I have triplicates done up. Again, it's just a time-saving thing. It's not essential, just helpful, I think, for a lot of people. We do not use electronic signatures right now in our Regional Center for Education, and I get asked this a lot if that's a possibility, and it may be in the future. But right now, we are not permitted to use electronic signatures. So this saves us some time at the photocopier, okay? And again, if you're using triplicates, just make sure that not all 3 of these copies end up in the student's file folder. They are supposed to be shared, okay? They have to be torn apart and shared. And the last thing I'm going to show you, which is huge, and it's in my PowerPoint, and if anybody wants it, I'll send you a copy of it. If you send, my email is indicated on my PowerPoint. If you want to email me, I'll send it to you. But I have these things drawn up, and they go on a whiteboard. So then they're reusable if you don't use a permanent marker. So it's huge. It's a wall chart. It's very big. And again, I'll show it to you in a second in my PowerPoint. But what it is a huge checklist that I put on the board. And for the most part, I make the students responsible for filling it in. So it's a lot of the required things that have to come in that you need to collect in co-op. And I put it on the wall. And every time I do a check-in with the students about their co-op placement, they have to fill it in. So for example, they're indicating where they're at in their hours. If they have their learning plan, part A done again at the midway point, etc. If they got their mid-evaluation from their host, it's kind of like a checklist that keeps everybody on track. And it does put a lot of the onus too on the students and keeps them focused to get all their stuff handed in. Okay, so I'll show you that in a second in my PowerPoint, but I wanted to show you that briefly before I begin. So I'm going to share my screen with you. I can't see any of you as I'm presenting this, so I'm just assuming you're all really impressed on your end as I go through this. But again, stop me if you have any questions, or just put them in the chat as I go through this, okay? All right, so here we go. I'm just going to share my screen with you. Just give me a second. Hopefully you can all see that. All right. I'm going to assume by your silence that you're all really impressed with my first slide and that you can see everything. If you can't, somebody let me know, okay? So again, there's my email there on the first page. If you want to email me afterwards with anything, feel free to. That's totally fine. And this will be all shared with you afterwards. So forms, let's get started. Why are they so important in co-op? Well, you are about to send your students out on work sites, some of them without a lot of education or formal training in a lot of fields. And they are probably going to engage in some, obviously, activities that involve risk. So your role is really, really important in terms of risk management. We need to mitigate as much student risk as possible, and we need to document that you've done so. So you need to do due diligence when it comes to student safety. And we are not expected to be experts. I know when I first started in co-op, I was like, oh boy, you're going to send me out to a construction site. I got to go meet with an automotive service technician. I got to meet with an engineer. Like, I'm not so familiar with those work environments. And we do not expect anybody to be an expert. But yes, you probably will need to educate yourself a little bit about safety in some of those areas and some of the things you need to be looking for. But you just need to do your best when it comes to reducing the risks that students may be faced with when they're out on the work site. So liability is a huge factor in co-op. Unlike a lot of high school courses, there is a huge liability factor. So if anything should go wrong with your students, you need to be able to prove that you have done everything possible to keep the students safe. So questions will come up. For example, did the students complete all the safety outcomes in curriculum? Did they get the required safety training? And are all the forms in order? And you'll be asked to provide those forms should something happen to your students on a work site. So if you cannot show that you've done due diligence, the forms, for example, are not there or they're incomplete, then your regional center, or say SFA, is liable for the student, as well as your school principal, as well as you as the co-op teacher. So we need to make sure, number one, students are safe, and equally as, or just as important as that, you need to make sure that you have documented that you've done everything you can to keep them safe. So that is the main reason why we have all these forms in co-op, okay? So first of all, a few tips on handling all these forms and what the forms are. So all of the forms, as many of you probably know, are on the department curriculum website. They are also housed in the co-op Moodle. And if you attended the session with Kim Duncan, you probably were familiarized with what the co-op Moodle is. If you don't know what it is, then you can always reach out to your YPC for more information. But so tips on filling out some of these forms. So first of all, at the start of the semester, I highly recommend you get a filing system set up. Get yourself organized right away. Now, some people just take this file checklist, which is on the department site, curriculum site, and then in the Moodle. Some people just take this and they staple it to a file folder, and that's their filing system, which is totally fine. You don't need to have the pocket folders like I have printed that I showed you earlier. But nonetheless, you should get this up and running at the beginning of the semester and get it ready, okay? So this is kind of your outline of everything that you need to keep a file on for the students, okay? And I'm going to go through some of these with you today, and you can come back and look at this later, as I mentioned, okay? I'm not going to go through all that list. right at the moment. But get a filing cabinet, because all of these file folders or pocket folders, whatever you're using, need to be kept at the school for 6 years after the co-op credit is complete. And the main reason for that is insurance reasons. If a student comes back 3 years down the road and says they hurt their back when they rode on co-op and they cannot work, for example, then there has to be some documentation somewhere that shows that they must have gotten hurt on their work site. Another reason why it's very helpful to keep all of the file folders for 6 years is you may have a student who goes out with a certified journey person who has accumulated some apprenticeship hours, and they may come back to you a couple years down the road and say, hey, I need some proof of my hours I put in for co-op. Sometimes they don't keep all their paperwork, but you've got it on file, so you can pull that out and provide proof of their hours that they put in with a certified journey person. So that's another reason to keep it on file at school. The wall chart that I mentioned to you, I showed it to you. This is it. I know this is kind of hard for you to see what it is. This is just something I had made, and I color-coded it just to kind of separate the categories. But again, it's something you can use to keep you and your students on task, and keep everybody, aware of where you're at with the requirements for the course. So some of this is paperwork, some of this is required assignments, and again, you can put it up on your whiteboard and reuse it again if you want to. So there's all kinds of things on here. You can read this over later. I'm going to explain a lot of it in a second, but I just wanted to show you that. So next point I'll make is don't send home these forms blank. I had a teacher once trying to save themselves time who sent out all of the required forms for co-op the very first day of class and said, well, I'm going to send them home now, get them signed by parent, just to save time and make sure I get them back. But they were sending them home blank, meaning the place of employment for the student where they were going to be hosted wasn't even indicated on there, or any of the safety information, nothing. So please do not do that. You can't ask the parent to sign a form that is incomplete. Don't send them home until you have filled in all of the required information and they know what they're signing. And next point is don't send a student out without their paper signed. There are implications if you do not have all of the paperwork back signed. So perhaps the two most important forms for safety coverage is the pre-placement assessment and the learning agreement. And I'll talk about this in a minute. Those two in particular, you have to have them back signed off by a parent and the employer before the student can start. Do not let them start unless you got it. There will not be any SIP coverage, school insurance program coverage, if you don't have them on file. Triplicates, I mentioned earlier, saves you a lot of time. Make sure you separate and share and file them if you are going to use them. It's not a requirement. Again, I just use it as a time-saving technique for teachers. Coordinate how you're going to handle forms and filing if you have another co-op teacher in your school. If you are not the only one doing co-op in your building, then I suggest you get together with the other teacher who is. So for example, when I was at Yarmouth High, there was one other co-op teacher, and we kind of chatted throughout the semester. Number one, you don't want to be approaching the same businesses that they already have, because that becomes a little bit of a pestering situation for host employers who keep getting contacted all the time from the same school, but just different teachers. So you need to communicate with anybody else on your staff who's also doing co-op and how you're going to handle filing. There should be some consistency with that, especially if students are going back and forth between your co-op and another co-op teacher. Your YPC, remember, is there to help you with your forms, and they may ask to see yours. I highly recommend, and this is totally optional, that if you have the ability to do so, and I know this is not always possible in large regional centers or in the CSFA, but if you have the opportunity, you could reach out to your YPC and say, hey, do you want to do a dry run with me of some of these forms to make sure I've got them right? And I now do that with all new teachers. I have the ability to do that because I'm working in a center that's not as large as, say, like the Halifax area. So I'm able to do that and sit down with teachers and do a dry practice run of some of these forms, which is really helpful. So you can maybe reach out to somebody, even another co-op teacher who's been doing it for a long time, if you want to do a practice run of completing these forms. The pre-placement assessment and the learning agreement must be done with the employer, and it's best if the student is present. Personally, I think the student needs to be present. Those two forms have to be done on site. They cannot be done over the telephone. You need to sit down with the host employer and have those two forms filled out with them. And it's best if the student is there, because in most cases, the student doesn't know where they're going, has never been there. It's good they hear that safety information firsthand, for example. So it's best if you make the introduction, they feel comfortable about knowing where they're going, can put a face to the name. It's best if the student is present. I personally would not do that required paperwork unless the student was there with me. And the last thing on that slide is other forms may be included in the file folder. There might be a confidentiality agreement from the host employer, for example. If we're fortunate enough to have students with the health authority this year, for example, they have a confidentiality agreement students sign. So some employers have their own confidentiality agreements. Consent forms for field trips, etc. All of these other forms need to go into their file folder. But there were required ones from the department, and that is what I'm going to focus on with you today. Okay, so I will just again go through some of these, highlight some things that I think are perhaps important to point out, and again take the time afterwards and go through this in more detail. Okay, so forms I broke them up into 3 categories. So the forms for the intake process. Students who take cooperative education need to apply to get into the program. So if you are teaching O2 students in cooperative education, their application form is actually their O2 application form, which is something different. So right now, I'll just talk about some of these forms for non-O2 co-op students, okay? So this is the application form, and if a student is interested in taking non-O2 co-op, they have to apply to the program. You need to screen the students that are coming in and make sure they are a good fit for the program. So on the top of the application form, some of the criteria that needs to be pointed out is listed there at the top, okay? I'll just make a mention about the age requirement. Students, it says on here have to be 16. According to the new policy coming out, which my understanding is we don't actually have yet. However, we have been told we can follow this directive on the age requirement. If they're in grade 10, they have to be 16. But if they're in grade 11 and they're 15, they can apply to come into co-op. So I know that doesn't say that on this form, but that is a change coming out in the policy. So applications can be shared. You can put them out in as a Google Doc, put them on social media, however you want to promote that in your school. Basic information at the top is asked of the students and what kind of careers they're interested in, what they have in mind. I just want to point out something that I think is really important. It's good to know if students have any medical conditions that you need to be aware of. So for example, I had a co-op student once who was allergic to peanuts who never told me. Never carried an EpiPen. I found out one day when I was visiting him on the work site at lunch hour that he had a peanut allergy. It's good to know that in advance, especially so they can make the people they're working with aware of that. The other thing I'll point out is it's really nice to know, and you'll see that I'll scroll down here. It's nice to know if the students are flexible about their work assignment and where you might put them. They really should have more than one choice as to where they want to go on their placement. You will soon discover that sometimes some areas are extremely difficult to find placements in, and they have to be willing to consider a plan B. So for example, veterinary medicine in the Yarmouth area, we have 2 vets, and there's the CSFA in our area as well, and a lot of high schools. So sometimes we don't have placements for everybody because we only have 2 vets and they may already be taking students. So we may not be able to get a placement for students in that area, in that field. So we need to know, are they willing and flexible to consider something else? That's really, really important. So this form has to be filled out, submitted, make sure it's signed at the bottom by everybody. You will see that it requires a parent signature, and along the bottom it does say that it just goes on file in the co-op file folder. Okay, so that's the application. Students are asked to provide references, and I'll just show you one example. This is the teacher reference form. They need 2 when they apply to co-op. The other one is the community reference form. Some students will say, well, I don't have anybody in the community who can provide a reference, so I'll give them some suggestions of somebody who has known them a long time through volunteering, some of their church groups, sports. If they are really in a pickle and can't find two, I personally have said to a student, get 2 teacher references then if you can't find a community one. But I really stress with them not to make it a relative. It should not be, for example, their aunt filling out their community reference form. And it is preferable it comes back to you in an envelope. You can actually give it to the student in an envelope so they have one, so it comes back to you sealed, so that, you know, whoever's giving the reference is feeling free that they can provide some information. So those are the references that come in with the application form. So the last thing about the intake process is the actual interview. You need to interview all of your non-O2 co-op students, and this is the interview record. It's very easy to score the questions that you're going to ask the students. There are sections you'll see of questions on here, and basically you just select 2 from each section, 2 questions from each section that you want to ask the students that you're interviewing. I highly recommend that you don't interview alone. If at all possible, find a guidance counselor, another teacher in your school who'd be willing to sit in with you to do the interviews. And the reason for that is, if you do not select a student, I've personally found it's a lot easier on that teacher to explain and justify why a student wasn't accepted into co-op. It doesn't put all the onus on you. And, you know, it gives you some insight too that maybe you didn't have on this student if you have somebody else involved in the interview. So at the very end of this interview record, just so that you are aware, if you do not accept the student into the co-op program, then you need to be able to justify as to why. So you'll have to tell them if they got a conditional acceptance or they were not accepted at all, and provide notes on why you have said that, why you did not select the student. And I'll give you an example. If it's a student who has shown that they don't have great attendance, they have missed a lot of time, they have not been passing all of their courses in the past, you may want to say, I'll give you a conditional acceptance, but I want to see that you are improving your attendance, trying to pick up your marks before the semester rolls around and you start co-ops. So that may be an instance where you give them a conditional acceptance, okay? So that is the record for the interview. So that is what you need to do. And you may think, oh, well, sometimes guidance counselors, for example, or anybody just places a student in co-op and you don't actually interview them first. They're placed in there. You still have to make sure you've got that application form and an interview and a record of it in their file folder. It's essential that you've shown due diligence in trying to find a student who is a good fit for the program and would be successful. Okay, so going on now to forms that must be completed and on file before the placement starts. Number 2 on your screen. I'm not going to go over a media consent form with you. At your Regional Center for Education or CSFA, in your school, you should probably have a form for that, a media consent form. And that is just so that you can take pictures of the students out on their work sites and you can share it with them, okay? The commitment agreement is a form that has to be filled out before the students go out to work. So I'll just show you what it looks like. Just a few points on this. Essentially, all of this is an outline of all of the expectations that we have for the student who is about to go out on a work site. So they haven't started work yet. This is a form that gets filled out before they go. Using this and what we call the learning agreement is what you would rely on if you had to put a student on probation, remove them temporarily from work if things weren't going well, or remove them outright. You would fall back on this, okay, to justify why you're doing that. So in here, there are things that are pivotal that you need to monitor as their co-op teacher. Their attendance in all of their other subjects, not just co-op, their academics at school. Are they following the school code of conduct? Are they adhering to the transportation policy and not transporting other co-op students? Are they reporting injuries to you pronto? Are they respecting confidentiality? So this is a form that I would recommend you read over with your students and then send it home and get it signed. Okay, you will see at the bottom that everybody needs to get a copy of this. It indicates at the very bottom who gets to keep this. So go over all of this information with the students. And again, I'm not going to read this all with you today because I'm hoping you're not asleep now as it is. So you can go over it yourself afterwards. But again, it's an outline of all the expectations that are there for students who are about to go out on co-op. So that is the commitment agreement. The placement readiness form is something that you sign, and you're basically signing off on the student saying, yes, they are ready to go to work. I feel that they are at a point where they are ready to go and work independently, okay? So again, at the top, there's just some criteria the students have to meet before you will deem them ready to go out. They have to meet all the outcomes of the placement instruction. The safety outcomes have to be met. The age requirement, don't forget, grade 10 is 16, grade 11 as long as they're 15 in grade 11. Use your professional judgment. There is some indicators on this sheet that you need to score the students on. The highest they can get for a score is 32, but it's not to say if they don't score at least a 16, you're going to, hold them back. You're going to have to use your professional judgment. In other words, they don't have to have at least a 50% on these criteria in order for you to determine whether or not you want to send them, okay? And I just want to highlight one thing about this form. You'll see at the bottom where there is a requirement for signatures. The only time it needs to be signed by a parent is if you have deemed the student not ready to go out. If you feel the student is ready, then you just check all of this off and put it in their file folder, which is why you see at the bottom that it only has to go into the file folder at school, the co-op file. It does not have to be sent out to the parent. The only time it requires a parent signature is if you're not sending them out or you're taking them off work temporarily because you don't feel they're ready to continue. Okay? So that is the readiness form. So the next two forms are perhaps most crucial. That's why I put a star beside them. They need to be done with the host. They are very, very important that you have these done and on file along with everything else, but perhaps these are the ones I deem are most important. So the learning agreement, when you have a placement for a student, you head out the door and you're going to get all the paperwork signed with them on site, bring the learning agreement with you. So basically in the learning agreement, it's almost like a contract, if you will, and it outlines the expectations for everyone involved in this arrangement. So the parent or guardian at home, the student, the school, and the community host who is hosting the student. Everybody needs to sign this. So there is a section for everyone. So bring it out with you when you go out to see the host, and you can have it filled out at that time. Okay? That is the learning agreements. The next one, the pre-placement assessment. This is a 3-page document. It's probably the one with the most detail. And I'll share with you a video on an example of how it gets done. So on the Co-op Moodle, I'll click on this link. I'll talk more about the pre-placement assessment in a second. But this is the form you take out with you. I always put it on a clipboard and brought my pen and went out on the work site. On the Co-op Moodle, there are some videos on how to do a pre-placement assessment. And there are 3 different ones. There's one in culinary, industrial, and in an office setting. And they'll guide you through how to do the pre-placement assessment. So they're not very long. I'm going to start off with showing you very briefly the one on industrial. But again, in the Moodle, underneath resources, you can find pre-placement assessment videos. So I'm going to share one with you right now.
This video will help you prepare for and complete a co-op pre-placement assessment with your potential host in an industrial or manufacturing setting to make sure students are entering a safe, knowledgeable, and prepared co-op environment. Before doing a pre-placement assessment, be sure to familiarize yourself with the questions and required forms prior to your meeting. Arrive at your destination on time, bringing all necessary paperwork with you. It's important to develop a positive relationship with the community host. Be sure to greet the mentor with good eye contact, a smile, and handshake. In some instances, the host may want the co-op student at the assessment so they can meet them and discuss opportunities. Sometimes a community host will only make a decision on a student after meeting them. After initial introductions, take some time to sit with the community host to answer questions and review paperwork. The paperwork includes the pre-placement assessment form and checklist, the learning agreement, and any paperwork the community host may have. The pre-placement assessment form can offer a lot of information about the host site and if that site will be a good fit for your student. This is also the ideal time to ask about the types of experiences that could be available for the student, tasks that may be required of them, and skills they can develop. Find out if there will be a wide range and scope of learning experiences. Ask if the student will need any specific training before they are allowed on the floor. For example, when working in an industrial setting, safety and awareness are paramount. First aid and WMIS will most likely be required. Will your host be providing any of the necessary training? If the student is already certified in any of the safety courses required, let your host know. Ask about personal protective equipment, PPE, dress code, and appearance. Is there a uniform or are there safety measures taken, like ear protection, high-vis vests, and eye protection? Will safety footwear, such as steel-toe shoes, be required? After you have had time to discuss possible co-op opportunities, it is time to take a tour. The tour will allow you to see the facility that the student will be working in. Look for safety hazards and ask questions about anything unclear to you. For instance, working in an industrial setting will require ear protection and steel-toe shoes, but also a high level of self-awareness working around extreme heat, moving vehicles, excessive noise, and power tools. After your tour, take time to sign off on any paperwork that may need either your signature or that of your host. Before leaving the site assessment, thank your host for their time, the tour, and their interest in being part of and supporting high school cooperative education.
Okay, so that is one of the videos that is found on the Moodle. And again, it just explains how to do the pre-placement assessment. So the pre-placement assessment, I'm not going to go through the whole thing with you, but I really encourage you reach out to your YPC if you like to do a practice run and how to fill it out. So the top part of the form is pretty standard to fill out. It's a lot of contact information. One thing I'll highlight here is the CQ number. So a certificate of qualification is basically a number that a journey person gets when they are certified. And if you have a student going out in a compulsory certified trade, especially, you need the CQ number. So compulsory certified trade, and an example of that would be an electrician, an automotive service technician. You need to know that they are actually certified and you need to record their numbers. So you'll ask them for proof of that to see their card and get their number from them. I'll just highlight some of the safety things that are on here in case you are not familiar with them. MED DVS training is something that is required for students if they are going out on a water placement, on a fishing boat, for example. It is a course that is offered at the School of Fisheries through NSCC. Reach out to your YPC if you have a student who needs MED DVS. The cost of it is covered from the department. So I just wanted to explain what is meant by MED DVS. Sometimes students are required to have safety training such as fall protection, fall arrest, which allows them to work from heights. Again, if your student is requiring that on a construction site, for example, then reach out to your YPC if you are not familiar with where to access those courses at. The cost of those is obviously covered by us, and students don't have to pay for those. So a lot of the questions that are on the pre-placement assessment have to do with safety, obviously. Again, we don't expect you to be experts, but do your best when you're filling this out with the student. There is one thing that I personally add in the other comments section on here, and that is the student schedule. So there's nowhere on here where you can indicate that, and it's going home to be signed by a parent and put on file. I think it's a good idea that the parents know what the expectation is for the student's schedule. So for example, are they going every Thursday from 9 to 5? You can write that in that section. The form got adjusted last year. You'll see there are some questions on here related to COVID. And they're on the last page just before the section where signatures are required. If a student is doing an additional co-op credit at the same site, okay, they're continuing on and staying there in the same school year, then you'll see at the bottom of the third page, there is a section where you can check off if the student is going to stay and do another credit, okay, within the same school year. And all of the safety questions and everything basically has stayed the same. Then you can get it signed on the bottom of the third page to do additional credit. Okay, I know I'm going through this quickly, but again, this is a vital form that really needs to be filled out well. If you're unfamiliar with anything on here, then reach out and ask for some help as to what some of it means. Okay, so that's the pre-placement assessment. The student learning plan, again, has to be started before the student goes out to work. So when students go out to work, yes, they're getting the opportunity to explore their careers, but they are getting the opportunity to develop employability skills, transferable skills that'll help them, you know, as they enter, stay, and progress in the work world. So it's really important for the students to identify where they're at in terms of their employability skills, identify some they could work on throughout their placement, and that is the focus of the learning plan part A. Okay, so they need to do this self-assessment and assess themselves on employability skills prior to starting their placement, so pre-placement, mid-placement, and end of placement. And the idea, obviously, is that they will develop some of these skills, they will improve upon some of them, and there will be evidence of growth as they're in their placement. Okay, so this is done 3 times. They need to start it. Obviously, I think in class you would be doing a lesson and talking about what we mean by employability skills before they would tackle this form. So they're going to come back to it, okay, as they go out on their placement. So, sorry, jumping back and forth there. During and after their co-op placement, there are 4 things. While they're out there, once they finally get to start on a work site, there are 4 things that are essential for them to work on, okay? Student learning plan part B, I'm going to come back to that in a second. I'm going to save that to last. But this is an easy one. So this is the student placement log. When the students start out on their co-op placement, they need to keep proof of their hours. And this is essential, okay? You're not there, obviously, every day they go out on their work site. So they need to keep a record of their hours, and if they're working with a journey person, they're also keeping a note of their CQ number, okay? So this has to come back and be kept on file at the school following the end of the placement. So it's just proof of their hours. They get it signed each time they go out. That one's pretty easy. The placement contact record. You as the co-op teacher are required to make contact with a host 4 times while the student is out earning their 80 hours for their credit. 2 of these times you have to be on site. The other 2 can be done over the phone, a text, an email, and then documentation has to take place, okay? You need to document that you went out or you made contact 4 times in total, okay? And this is the form you can use. Now, what I used to do was take this form, print it off, stick it in the file folder, and every time I go out on a work site, I just grab the file folder. You can fill it in electronically and it'll allow you to have more room to write some things down. I just found it easier to bring it with me, and I would take notes while I was there visiting, fill it out in the car, and then it was done and I didn't have to go back to it later on the computer. So I printed it off and put it in the file folder. So you have to make contact and record, you know, the date you made contact, whether it was on site or not. Remember, 2 out of the 4, you have to be on site. And then you have to write some notes down about your visit. And I've had a lot of teachers ask, you know, what do I look for when I go out and what do I ask? And I devised a little checklist of my own when I was a co-op teacher. And I think a lot of it, you could probably generate some questions on your own as to what to ask. Obviously ask, what has the student been doing? What are their strengths? What are some areas maybe that the student could focus on for improvement? Are there any safety concerns? The big question I always ask is, has the student been injured at all? And documentation of that is essential. Okay, so that is kept on file at the school as well. So you have to make sure that you, the teacher, are checking up on the student during co-op. Host evaluations, there are 2 of them. There is a mid one and a final. When I would go out and do the pre-placement assessment and learning agreement, I always brought these with me at the time, so the host had them. So midway through the credit, approximately 40 hours, and again at the end, 80 hours, this gets filled out, hopefully with the presence of the student at the time, and it's shared and discussed with the student. And essentially, it's a standard form that all students get assessed on in terms of how they're doing on their work placement. So there's criteria there and a scoring system, and the students are basically just scored on all these employability skills. There's an opportunity for the employer to write in their own comments as well. And you'll notice after the evaluation, there is a handout included with this, which is kind of an explanation for the employers on what are employability skills, what are the ones that we are hoping that they will comment on and assess the student on. So that is the community host. All right, the last thing, can you believe it? Almost at the end. The last thing I'll just mention, which is so important, is the student learning plan part B. So I mentioned to you that the hope is that students will develop their employability skills when they're out on the work site. And student learning plan part B, they are basically going to be outlining some goals for themselves. So they've assessed themselves on employability skills in part A. In part B, they're going to start looking at which employability skills could they focus on improving while they're out there. So they need to set some goals. The goals could be in relation to specific skills, such as communication skills, or it could be job-specific skills. Perhaps they're really eager to learn how to change a transmission, for example. So it could be a very job-specific goal, but they have to develop 3 goals, okay? And that's what they're going to do in Learning Plan Part B, is develop 3 goals. They are also going to have to do some reflection practices. That's a part of Learning Plan Part B, and reflect on their learning. What are they learning? And so on the second page of this document is where they're going to outline their goals and evidence of success. And you can help them with identifying what their goals are, what they would like to do, what they would like to focus on specifically during their placement. Again, these can be employability skills, or they can be related to the job, a combination of both. They should be reviewed with the teacher, and the host can give input on them. As a part of the Learning Plan Part B, they also have to log in and write in a description each time they're at work of what they are doing and how any of the tasks that they're doing relate to some of their goals. Okay, so this is where they're going to document what they're doing each day they go to work. That's what you're looking at on the screen right now, is the second part of the Learning Plan Part B, where they document what they're doing each day they go to work. Okay, there's all kinds of room for that. There is an opportunity for reflections in their Learning Plan Part B. And my understanding is, if it's not already there now, and the co-op Moodle, there will be some examples of learning plans so that you can see what one looks like as a model, exemplar to show students as to what one looks like when it's already complete. Okay. So the very last thing that can go in the file folder is any communication that you have with the hosts. Don't forget to file all of those in the file folder as well. So it is 10 to 11. Gosh knows I've been talking long enough. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen with you. And I'm just going to check and see if there's any questions in the chat box. And right now I don't see any. Are there any questions anybody wants to ask? I know this is really kind of a dry presentation, and I apologize for that. I guess there's no way around it when you're talking about paperwork. How do you make paperwork fun and exciting? But nonetheless, I hope that you got something out of it today and it helps you. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to contact me and reach out to your YPC in your area. They're there to support you. So Any questions before I sign off? Thanks for coming, everyone. I know it's summer break and, you know, thinking about school right now after a very hard year, I'm sure wasn't, you know, so appealing. So thank you so much for coming, and I wish you all the best in co-op, and I hope you enjoy it and become as passionate about it as I am. It's a very, very rewarding program to be teaching in. So thanks, everyone. Thank you.